23 Russian drones crossed into Poland on a single night in September 2025. For 7 hours, they flew deep into Polish territory while families slept below. Polish and Dutch fighter jets scrambled to shoot them down, marking the first time NATO has ever had to destroy Russian drones inside Alliance airspace. One home in Reiki was damaged that night, though whether by a drone or a malfunctioning Polish missile remains disputed, turning a quiet village into a front line of modern warfare. This wasn't an accident. Poland recorded 19 separate incursions that night, with debris scattered hundreds of kilometers from the border. The timing tells us everything we need to know. This happened just 48 hours before Russia and Belarus launched their massive Zapad military exercises. Think of it as Russia knocking on NATO's door, testing how quickly the alliance would answer. September the 9th started like any other evening in eastern Poland. Families were settling in for a night when radar screens at Polish air defense centers began lighting up with contacts. Starting at 11:30 Central European summertime, waves of unmanned aircraft crossed from Ukrainian airspace into Poland. But something was different this time. Prime Minister Donald Tusk would later reveal that for the first time on this scale, a significant number of drones flew directly from Belarus into Poland. The Polish military tracked these incursions for 7 straight hours. Fighter jets took off from bases across the country, whilst ground-based air defences went to full alert. Polish F-16s joined Dutch F-35s already patrolling under NATO command. Together, they hunted drones through the darkness, shooting down several over Polish territory. The scale of the response was unprecedented. Warsaw-Chopin, Warsaw-Modlin, Rzeszów-Jasonka, and Lublin airports were temporarily closed during the operation. Commercial flights were diverted as military aircraft took priority in eastern Polish airspace. By morning, we had the full context. Early estimates suggested 9 crash sites were discovered, though reports have varied between 7 and 17 debris finds, with some as far as 700 kilometers from the border. In Reiki, near Lublin, residents woke to find a house severely damaged. Initial reports blamed a drone impact, though subsequent investigation suggested it might have been caused by a malfunctioning AIM-120 missile from a Polish F-16. Polish authorities haven't fully confirmed either explanation, with the president demanding clarification. The numbers matter here. 19 confirmed incursions over 7 hours isn't a navigation error or a few drones getting lost. Independent counts put the total between 19 and 23 drones. This was a coordinated operation, with UAVs entering Polish airspace in waves. Some cases from the direction of Ukraine, where Russia was conducting one of its largest overnight strikes. Others, crucially, came directly from Belarus. Poland's response was immediate and decisive. Within hours, the government closed the border with Belarus, including all rail crossings. Airports were temporarily closed during the immediate crisis. Then Poland kept eastern airspace restrictions in place. Most significantly, Poland formally requested NATO Article 4 consultations, marking only the 8th time in the alliance's history that this mechanism had been invoked. Understanding what flew into Poland that night is crucial. These weren't sophisticated military drones carrying heavy warheads. Analysis of the wreckage revealed most were Gerbera drones, Russia's cheap answer to expensive air defense systems. Basically a drone made from polystyrene foam and plywood powered by a small commercial engine. They cost about $10,000 each, less than many cars. Gerberas serve a special purpose in Russian military doctrine. They are decoys. They look enough like the deadly Shahed drones on radar that air defense operators can't ignore them. Every Gerbera that draws fire from a missile or causes fighters to scramble is one less defense available for real attack drones. It's psychological warfare through economics. A Patriot interceptor costs $4 million, though that night fighters primarily used air-to-air missiles like AMRAAMs and Sidewinders. Still, using any military interceptor to destroy a foam decoy is like using a sledgehammer to swat a fly. But calling them harmless would be wrong. Some Gerbera variants carry small warheads or reconnaissance equipment. Even unarmed ones can cause damage, as the destroyed roof in Reiki proved, regardless of whether the damage came from the drone itself or defensive fire. More importantly, every Gebera that crosses into NATO airspace gathers intelligence. Russian operators watch how quickly NATO responds, which radar sites activate, what flight paths interceptors take, and how air defenses coordinate. This information is worth far more than the drones themselves. The assembly of these drones tells another story. Investigations trace them to the Yellow Buga facility in Russia's Tatarstan region, where they reportedly assembled using Chinese-made kits from companies like Skywalker Technology. Satellite imagery shows this facility has expanded rapidly and added air defenses, suggesting Russia's plans to produce these decoys in massive numbers. When you can trade 10 cheap drones for detailed intelligence on NATO's air defense network, it's a bargain Russia seems eager to exploit. Poland's decision to invoke Article 4 rather than Article 5 reveals sophisticated strategic thinking. Article 5 is NATO's nuclear option, the collective defense clause that says an attack on one is an attack on all. It's only been triggered once in NATO's history after September the 11th. Article 4, by contrast, requires allies to consult whenever any member feels threatened. It's diplomacy with teeth, urgent enough to demand immediate action, but measured enough to avoid automatic escalation. This distinction matters enormously. Under international law, unauthorized military drones entering sovereign airspace violate the Chicago Convention and constitute a sovereignty breach. But sovereignty violations don't automatically equal armed attacks under Article 5. NATO members must collectively agree that an armed attack has occurred before triggering collective defense. By choosing Article 4, Poland achieved several goals simultaneously. First, it forced the issue onto the North Atlantic Council's emergency agenda within hours. Second, it unified allies without requiring them to decide whether Russia had committed an act of war. Third, it created space for a proportional response that would strengthen defenses without escalating to armed conflict. This wasn't weakness, it was strategic wisdom that recognized the difference between provocation and invasion. The speed of NATO's response vindicated Poland's approach. Within 48 hours, Secretary-General Mark Rutte announced Operation Eastern Sentry, a new defensive operation covering NATO's entire eastern flank from the Baltic to the Black Sea. Denmark deployed F-16s and an air defense frigate. France sent Rafale fighters. Germany contributed Eurofighters. According to NATO's own framing, the operation emphasizes flexibility and integration, with forces able to shift dynamically based on threat assessments. The timing of these incursions was no coincidence. 2 days after drones invaded Polish airspace, Russia and Belarus launched Zapad 2025, their cyclical military exercise focused on the Western theater. Zapad, which means West in Russian, has historically served as both military training and political theater. The 2021 edition preceded Russia's decision to leave forces in Belarus, which later served as a launching pad for the 2022 invasion of Ukraine. The 2025 exercise appeared smaller than previous iterations, with Western estimates suggesting only a few thousand troops participated inside Belarus, far fewer than the tens of thousands in 2021. But size isn't everything. The exercises included nuclear planning elements and new missile systems, sending deliberate signals about escalation capabilities. Belarus even invited international observers, including a surprise visit from US military officials attempting to control the narrative around the exercises. Prime Minister Tusk explicitly linked the drone incursions to Zapad, calling them part of a larger Russian-Belarusian operation. Military analysts pointed to the strategic importance of the Suwalki Gap in the context, the 65-kilometer corridor connecting Poland to Lithuania that represents the Baltic states' only land route to the rest of NATO. This narrow strip, sandwiched between Belarus and Russia's Kaliningrad exclave, has been called NATO's Achilles heel. In any conflict, Russian control of this corridor would cut off the Baltic states from Allied reinforcement. By testing air defenses near the Suwalki Gap just before Zapad, Russia gathered crucial intelligence about NATO's ability to defend the vulnerable corridor. Every radar activation, every fighter scramble, every communication between Polish and Allied forces provided data Russian planners could incorporate into their exercises and future operations. This represents grey zone warfare at its most sophisticated. Russia probes without attacking, Tests without declaring, learns without risking. If NATO overreacts, Moscow claims innocent navigation errors. If NATO underreacts, Moscow maps weaknesses. The information war began before the drones even landed. Russia's defense ministry claimed Poland was never targeted, insisting the strikes aimed only at Ukrainian sites. Belarus went further, claiming drones lost their course due to electronic jamming and that they had warned Poland and Lithuania about approaching aircraft. The Kremlin dismissed Western concerns as nothing new, treating the largest drone incursion into NATO territory as barely worth commenting on. These narratives crumble under scrutiny. Navigation errors don't explain 19 separate incursions over 7 hours. Electronic warfare doesn't cause drones to fly hundreds of kilometers in the wrong direction in coordinated waves. The claim that Belarus warned Poland actually undermines their story. If they knew drones were approaching Polish airspace, well, why didn't they stop them? European officials saw through the deception immediately. Germany's defense minister Boris Pistorius called the violations deliberate. A senior European official confirmed the pattern suggested intentional testing rather than accident. NATO's Supreme Allied Commander, Europe, framed the response as deterring further reckless and dangerous acts, diplomatic language that nevertheless assigns blame clearly. Russia pushed multiple contradictory narratives simultaneously. The drones were jammed. They were never meant for Poland. They were harmless decoys. NATO overreacted. NATO underreacted. This information chaos serves a purpose, making it harder for Western publics to understand what really happened and why it matters. Poland countered with transparency, publishing radar tracks, crash site locations, and detailed timelines while avoiding inflammatory rhetoric. Operation Eastern Sentry represents NATO's most significant air defense reinforcement of the eastern flank since the Cold War. Launched within 48 hours of Poland's Article 4 invocation, it demonstrates the alliance can still act with speed and purpose when consensus exists. According to NATO's stated posture, the operation emphasizes 3 key principles: flexibility, integration, and unpredictability. Flexibility means forces can shift rapidly between sectors based on threat assessments. If Russia probes the Baltic states tomorrow, aircraft can redeploy from Poland within hours. If the Black Sea becomes the focus, resources flow south. This dynamic posture prevents Russia from gaming out NATO's defenses, since those defensives constantly evolve. Integration brings together national and NATO assets under unified command. Danish F-16s work alongside French Rafales, German Eurofighters coordinate with Polish air defenses, Dutch frigates provide radar coverage for Allied aircraft. This isn't just military cooperation, it's the physical manifestation of Article 4's consultation requirement. The immediate contributors reveal both NATO's strengths and limitations. Denmark's deployment of fighters and an air defense frigate shows smaller allies punching above their weight. France's 3 Rafales demonstrate political commitment despite French skepticism about confronting Russia too directly. Germany's 4 Eurofighters balance Berlin's desire to support allies with its fear of escalation. This incident reveals uncomfortable truths about modern warfare and alliance politics. First, cheap drones have fundamentally changed the escalation ladder. Russia can now probe NATO defenses for the cost of a luxury car, forcing million-dollar responses to $10,000 threats. This economic asymmetry favors the aggressor, allowing Russia to impose costs without risking significant assets. Second, the gray zone between peace and war has expanded dramatically. These weren't quite attacks, but they weren't accidents either. They violated sovereignty without triggering automatic retaliation. They gathered intelligence without declaring reconnaissance. They tested responses without accepting responsibility. International law struggles with such ambiguity, and NATO's political decision-making process moves slowly when confronted with actions that don't fit neat categories. Third, geography still matters enormously in European security. The concentration of incursions near the Suwalki Gap wasn't random. This corridor remains NATO's greatest vulnerability, a narrow lifeline that Russia and Belarus could sever in hours during any conflict. The drone probes mapped exactly how NATO would defend this critical terrain. Fourth, the Belarus factor complicates everything. When drones fly from Belarusian territory, who bears responsibility? Belarus hosts Russian forces but maintains nominal independence. It participates in exercises but claims not to control Russian operations. This ambiguity lets both countries deflect accountability whilst coordinating actions. The technical challenge these drones pose deserves careful examination. Modern air defense systems were designed to stop sophisticated threats: ballistic missiles, advanced fighters, cruise missiles with terrain-following capability. They excel at destroying complex, expensive targets, but Gebera drones break this paradigm. They're simple, cheap, and numerous. Using expensive interceptors to destroy $10,000 foam drones isn't just wasteful, it's unsustainable. NATO faces an adaptation crisis. Current systems can detect and track small drones, but economically viable engagement remains elusive. The solution likely involves layered defenses using appropriate tools for different threats. Gun-based systems like the German Zapad provide cheap kinetic solutions for slow drones. Electronic warfare can disrupt navigation and control. Drone-on-drone combat using defensive UAVs to ram or entangle attackers provides cost parity. But technology alone won't solve this challenge. Doctrine must evolve to handle ambiguous provocations. Rules of engagement need updating for unmanned systems that blur combatant and reconnaissance roles. Training must prepare operators for swarm attacks, mixing decoys with genuine threats. Legal frameworks require modernization to address sovereignty violations by unmanned systems. The Yelabuga facility's expansion suggests Russia understands this asymmetry and plans to exploit it extensively. If Russia can produce thousands of Geberas monthly, it could theoretically sustain probing operations indefinitely. Poland's domestic reaction revealed deep divisions about engaging with NATO versus maintaining independence. President Nawrocki, elected in August 2025 on a conservative platform skeptical of Brussels, nevertheless supported invoking Article 4. This bipartisan consensus on security matters sent an important signal about Polish unity when threatened. Across NATO, reactions varied significantly. Baltic states strongly supported Poland, understanding they could face similar probes tomorrow. Germany balanced support with caution. France questioned whether responses might encourage more Russian testing. This mixed response highlights NATO's ongoing challenge, maintaining cohesion when members perceive threats differently. The economic mathematics are practical. 20 drones costing perhaps $200,000 total forced responses costing millions. Fighter sorties burned thousands of pounds of fuel per hour. Air-to-air missile engagements cost hundreds of thousands per shot. Airport closures lose millions in economic activity. The cost-imposition ratio might exceed 50-1 in Russia's favor. But economics cut both ways. The sanctions regime constrains Russia's drone production despite low unit costs. Critical components require international supply chains vulnerable to interdiction. The Yelabuga facility's reliance on Chinese kits creates diplomatic leverage if Beijing chooses to restrict exports. 3 plausible futures emerge from this incident. In the optimistic scenario, NATO's firm but measured response deters further incursions. Russia concludes that probing operations yield insufficient intelligence to justify diplomatic costs. Eastern Sentry evolves into permanent enhancing air policing. Technology advances provide cost-effective counter-drone systems. The pessimistic scenario sees escalating provocations. Russia increases drone operations, incursions become weekly, then daily. Public pressure forces Poland to invoke Article 5 after casualties occur. NATO faces impossible choices between war and credibility. Alliance unity fractures as members disagree on responses. The most likely scenario lies between extremes. Drone incursions continue sporadically, timed to Russian strategic needs. NATO develops partial solutions that reduce but don't eliminate the threat. Both sides settle into an uncomfortable equilibrium of probe and response. 23 drones changed everything that September night in 2025. They proved that modern warfare doesn't require armies crossing borders or missiles striking cities. A few $100,000 worth of foam and electronics can trigger international crises, test alliance resolve, and gather strategic intelligence. Poland's invocation of Article 4 marks a watershed moment in NATO's adoption of grey zone warfare, showing that the alliance can respond decisively without escalating unnecessarily. Whether this response deters or encourages further Russian probing remains the critical question that will shape European security for years to come.